Hello, dear students. Welcome to the explanation of stanza 4 and 5 of Adrian Rich's poem, Snapshots of a Daughter-in-Law. So far, we have discussed how she looks at her mother-in-law and she feels that she has led a kind of compromise kind of life, and she does not realize that it had been a life of all kinds of bondages, but she seems to have made peace with it. But the daughter-in-law, on the other hand, is not ready to do so, and she is frustrated by the kind of life that she sees imposed upon her. So here I'll first read stanza 4. Knowing themselves too well in one another, their gifts no pure fruition, but a thorn, the prick file sharp against a hint of scorn. Reading while waiting for the iron to heat, writing, my life had stood a loaded gun. In that Amherst pantry, where while the jellies boil and scum, or more often, iron-eyed and beaked and purposed as a bird, dusting everything on the whatnot of everyday life. See, in this particular stanza, we see that the kind of aggression and the kind of anger which is there in the daughter-in-law, it rises to another kind of level, a higher kind of level. And in these lines, we find a very clear kind of element of intertextuality, because the poetess is referring to another poetess, Emily Dickinson, who had led a very reclusive kind of life, and we know that she's one of the most popular American women writers. But then Emily led a kind of life which kept her housebound, and although she was such a wonderful poet, she could not free herself from the everyday chores or the kind of routine life that was there around her. If we look at these lines closely, we'll find that the daughter-in-law sees uh, the common link between her and Emily Dickinson. Just look at this line, knowing themselves too well in one another, that as if she could connect with her, as if she could uh, feel what Emily Dickinson might have felt in her own time. Their gifts, no pure fruition but a thorn. Now, look at the image of fruition and thorn. These are gifted women, but their gifts, they are not really being put to use because they are housebound. So this gift, in a way, turns out to be a kind of thorn, which does not cause pain to anybody else, but to themselves. The prick file sharp against a hint of scorn. And what do you get from society for such women who have a talent, who can write and who can independently think, is an attitude of scorn. And they have to manage between the household chores at the same time while they're reading or writing. And it's interesting how Emily Dickinson puts it. It's the title of a poem. My life had stood a loaded gun that could be fired but was never fired. So you're pent up, and you don't find any kind of outlet to it. So what is happening in the house, like normal activities in the kitchen, jellies boiling and other stuff, that also becomes uh, quite irritating for them, because they know that day after day they have to go through the same kind of routine. And then she says that iron-eyed and beaked and purposed as a bird, dusting everything. Now, when you're doing these household chores, you have to remain very, very focused. And this is uh, dusting the house or doing everyday activity is not something that requires a great deal of mind, and yet it takes your energy, it saps you out. So here we see that, she reaches out, the daughter-in-law reaches out to other women like her, and she can easily connect with what kind of frustration they must have felt at that point of time. Now let's see what Mr. Jeevan Kumar has to say in his reading of of the fourth stanza. He says, Rich imagines the life of another thinking woman, Emily Dickinson, and she was a favorite of hers. This 19th century reclusive American poetess lived in Amherst, Massachusetts, all her life. Rich says that in spite of Dickinson's genius, she could not prevent herself from being saddled with the household work like every other woman. One of her poems begins with the line, My life has stood a loaded gun. Yet for all her genius, she was surrounded not by fellow poets and writers, but by pans containing boiling jellies, by dusters, by irons, household, and the household paraphernalia. This is pretty much the same that you know when a thinking woman she would start uh, analyzing her own anguish, her own frustration with the kind of life that she's leading. She definitely would look out and would look out for other women like her. So the daughter-in-law in this poem can easily reach out to the figure of Emily Dickinson, and she can imagine the similar kind of life that she might have led in her own time, despite all her genius. Now we come to the stanza 5. It's a pretty short stanza containing just three lines. The first line is in French. My French is not good. I don't know. But then still I'll try to read out. Dolls Redens, Dolls Loquens, which pretty much is explained by Adrian Rich as she shaves her legs until they gleam like petrified mammoth tusk. Now, again, it comes to the figure of women preparing themselves or beautifying themselves so that they could look pleasant, they could look beautiful. And this is a kind of condition that is almost, imposed on her as if their looking beautiful is more important than what goes on in their minds. And she says that, while a woman is shaving her legs, which by men doesn't have to be done, they, the legs of women have to gleam. She compares it with the image of a petrified mammoth tusk, as if it is being rubbed again and again so that it becomes beautiful. So overall, the idea is of these lines is that you know you might be an independent woman or an independent thinking kind of woman, and still when you see other women around you, they are living the idea or the frame which the society or patriarchy has created for them. Now let's see what Mr. Jeevan Kumar has to say about this stanza, which is much in line what I've been trying to say. In the fifth section, the woman is trying to conform to the patriarchal stereotype of the sweetly smiling, softly speaking lady shaving her legs so that her body hair does not disturb the man's delicate sensibilities. Now, this is very interesting that why a woman is supposed to shave her legs simply because if she lets them grow, it's against the norm, and it's against the norm. What kind of norm? It's against the norm of they're looking pretty. So being pretty, you need to have your legs shaved. And why? For whose side? That is for the male side. But even as she shaves her legs, she's aware. Now look at this. That this woman is a thinking woman, and she knows that what she's doing. She is aware that they shine like the tusks of a dead prehistoric animal, the mammoth. In other words, she realizes that by conforming to male stereotypes of women, She's trying to conform to something outdated and lifeless, something that denies her own individuality. It's not really the question of whether a woman shaves her legs or not, but really the point is that uh, society or patriarchy has already created a set frame for women, and somehow or the other, by different kinds of means and by the environment which is there around women, they are driven towards adopting all those values which are not natural but have been created by the patriarchal setup to suit their own needs. Thank you.